government to look at the threat that ISIL poses in Afghanistan. We've taken significant steps in Afghanistan under the leadership of General Nicholson to address the ISIL threat and made significant progress working alongside Afghan forces with regard to that. But it still poses, obviously, a threat to Afghanistan, and the people of Afghanistan will continue to stay very, very focused on ISIL wherever it rears its head, whether it's Afghanistan, whether it's Iraq and Syria, whether it's other parts of the world. Jennifer.
What is the Defense Secretary, what does Secretary Carter think about a four-star Marine retired possibly taking his job, and what does he think about civilian control of the military, and would it be appropriate to receive a waiver at this moment in time to have a retired four-star to take his position?
I know you're going to be disappointed to hear that I'm not going to weighed in on potential choices made by the next president-elect with regard to this department and the next Secretary of Defense. The president-elect will make his decisions, and it would be inappropriate for me to weigh in on that.
But does he have strong views about civilian leadership of the military?
I think the Secretary believes that the structure within the Department of Defense is a healthy structure and has served the country well. Again, he's not going to weigh in on who might replace him. It would be inappropriate.
And why does Secretary Carter believe that the NSA and U.S. Cyber Command should be separated? What are the problems with having them combined?
The Secretary has said publicly in the past that it has been worthwhile to look at the structure in place right now to make sure that it is as effective as possible in dealing with the evolving threats this country faces. That's a review that the President and others have acknowledged as well. And that's, I'll leave it at that. It's a question about looking at the most efficient way to protect the American people.
But what about it is not working right now?
You haven't heard the Secretary say that it isn't working. What he's said, and I think what the President has spoken to, is the fact that it's worth reviewing exactly whether or not this is the most efficient structure going forward. Yes, Tony.
A couple things. One on the al-Masri hit. Can you tell us roughly how many core al-Qaeda leaders now are sought to exist now 15 years after 9/11? Do you have a rough order on that?
Tony, I don't from here. I can try and take that question, but I think what we continue to demonstrate with this strike and with previous strikes is that we continue to target senior al-Qaeda leaders as they continue to pose a threat to the United States. And we've demonstrated a willingness to do that, and I think this is evidence of that as well.
If you could find out, I mean, a few years ago, Secretary Panetta said it was something like 100 were in Afghanistan of al-Qaeda. That would be useful just for the record, 15 years after 9/11.
We will try and get a number for you. It may be something that we have to look to our other, the intelligence community as well.
I have a couple of questions on Secretary Carter. When he came in office, he said he was a man in a hurry. A number of initiatives he wanted to get in place. He's in the end game now with the last 2 months. What are the one or two must-complete initiatives that he would like to get out before he's out the door?
I think the Secretary has carried out a number of initiatives on his watch that he feels very confident are not only in place but will survive past his time as Secretary. He continues to devote his efforts, of course, to the counter-ISIL campaign and seeing that through to the end of his term and seeing that as successful as possible while he is in office. And I think he feels good about where that campaign is at this particular moment in time, but knows that there's significant work to do. We've talked at length about his innovation agenda, some of the things he's put in place with regard to that. We've talked at length about the Force of the Future initiatives, which are incredibly important in terms of not just for the here and now and for his successor, but for years down the road. These are changes with regard to our men and women in uniform that will have an impact not necessarily immediately, but for years. And I think he feels confident that those changes are sound changes, positive changes, changes that will ensure that the force of the future will be just as capable as the force he has today.
The Force of the Future needs to be funded. And in the FY18 budget, what is the status of that budget plan? Is it near complete? And is the Trump transition team now reviewing the budget and the budget right now?
Well, Tony, you're talking about a fiscal year 18 budget when we don't have a fiscal year 17 budget right now. So,
It isn't being prepared.
well, let me just make the point that as the Secretary did the other day during our trip, that he's disappointed that we're once again confronted with a situation where we have to deal with a continuing resolution. The Secretary has been very vocal in his call for budget certainty, the importance of budget certainty to this department going forward, and that is a message certainly that he will continue to deliver in his final remaining weeks in this position. I'm not going to characterize where the fiscal year 18 budget is at this point. I'll leave it to the the President-elect's transition team to tell you what it is, the information they're seeking at this particular moment in time from the department.
Because you know this thing has to be put to bed by December in order to come out at some reasonable amount of time next year. Is it near complete, or is there still back and forth with the services on it?
Tony, again, we've been focused so much on the current budget situation that, yes, of course, work has been done towards the fiscal year 18 budget, but I'm not going to characterize exactly where it is at this particular moment in time, other than to say that the professionals within this department, including those responsible for the budget, are doing everything they need to ensure a smooth transition, to make sure that the certainty, as much certainty as possible, is put in place for the next administration and for our troops and men and women in uniform. They deserve that certainty. They deserve a better situation in terms of the budget than what they're facing right now. Yes, Jenny.
Thank you, Cook. On exchange of military information between South Korea and Japan. Mm-hmm. South Korea and Japan signed a military information protection agreement. Mm-hmm. What is the U.S. position in this regard?
We've been very supportive of efforts by South Korea and Japan to enhance their own security cooperation. We think this is an important step and a positive step. And, of course, we encourage those two countries to continue their collaboration with regard to the security threats in the area.
The U.S. supports this?
Yes. Laurent.
Thank you. There was some confusion last week when there were reports on the death of the Al-Qaeda leader you mentioned. Can you say, for instance, if that Al-Qaeda leader you mentioned was someone who was close with Zarqawi? And I also read things about this Al-Qaeda being the cleric who really inspired Zarqawi and had really Egyptian-born cleric inspiring Zarqawi. Is it the same guy, or are we talking about a different guy?
Laurent, I don't want to provide information to you that I'm not 100% certain of. I know that, as it's been conveyed to me, this is a legacy al-Qaeda leader who's had a leadership role, both in Afghanistan and in Syria. But as to his own people he's impacted or had direct contact with within al-Qaeda leadership, I'm not going to speak to that without knowing for certain.
Egyptian?
Yes, as I pointed out, he was Egyptian. Yes.
Back to NSA and Cyber Command. A lot of the congressional opposition to the split is based on the argument that Cyber Command doesn't have the capabilities and personnel it needs to stand on its own at this point. Does the Secretary believe it does have the ability to stand on its own? And at this point, is the split off the table for the remainder of this administration?
I will just repeat what the Secretary has said before. He's been very clear about the importance of Cyber Command, the importance of protecting our own networks, about making sure that we are addressing the threats not only of today but the evolving threats of the future. And this has been part of the ongoing conversation as we look at this structure. And I'm not going to predict the future as to what decisions the President might make. Ultimately, this is a decision for the President to make. Yes.
You mentioned earlier you're concerned about living under a continuing resolution. Could you lay out some of the difficulties that creates, or the particular high concerns you have on a CR taking you into March?
Well, the concerns that you've had, you've heard from this Secretary before, but every time we do a CR, there are implications for this department. It means that there are certain investments that are not being made. We're being funded at existing levels, and that does not reflect necessarily the changes and adjustments that this department feels are necessary in order to make sure we're doing everything for our troops, our civilian workforce, and for the nation's security. There are questions again about particular programs that the Secretary has spelled out our funding proposals for, and the fact that they are remaining at current levels, again, restricts in some respects our ability to exercise the policy decisions and the security of this country in the most effective way possible. It is not the right way to do budgeting, and that's been a point that this Secretary and plenty of others have made previously. It is inefficient. It does more harm than good in terms of certainty and being able to put in place the national security structure that the Secretary believes is the most effective means possible for protecting the American people. Carlo.
Peter, just a quick follow-up on Afghanistan. There were reports that the ANSAF had begun, I think for the first time, to start conducting combat or offensive operations in the country during the traditional sort of winter lull. And from what I understand also, it is to sort of kind of push back the Taliban's expanding footprint in Kunduz in the north and in Helmand in the south. Is it the department's opinion that this effort is, or this move signifies a sort of an increasingly deteriorating situation in the country? And have a follow-up after that.
I think, Carlo, what you've got is a situation in Afghanistan where they have set up a national strategy that General Nicholson has talked about in terms of how to confront the Taliban, the challenge posed by the Taliban. That strategy, as we've detailed on multiple occasions, includes ensuring that the Taliban is not able to take population centers. They've been effective in carrying that out, and although it's been a difficult fighting season, they've been able, in a resilient fashion, to hold on to district centers, for example. They've also been taking the fight to the Taliban, and I think this is a reflection of the kind of capabilities that the Afghan security forces now have, in which they're leaning forward and taking the fight to, they're leading the effort to secure their own country. And this is decisions made by the Afghans and by the Afghan leadership as to how to conduct, how to operate their forces, particularly at this particular moment in time. And I think General Nicholson and everyone at Resolute Support is supportive of what the Afghans are doing, and will continue to support that effort.
And also, can we expect an uptick in support operations by U.S. and coalition forces in countries?
We stand prepared to support Afghan forces as needed. And we'll continue the mission we have, to the train and advise mission with the Afghan forces, as we have been for the last couple of years. There's no change in our role, even though the Afghans may be pushing, again, operations into the winter months, which may be unusual from years past. Yes, Ryan.
So back to the al-Masri hit really quickly. Was he, you said he was core al-Qaeda, but is there understanding that he might have been dual-hatted with al-Nusra, or the regional branch there, or is he kind of, do we think he's separate? And was he active, was there an idea that he might have been actively plotting against Western targets or Western interests?
This is someone, again, who's had a long history with al-Qaeda, including in Afghanistan, and the reason he was targeted was, again, because of his role in al-Qaeda in years past and currently, and that's the reason he was targeted.
If I just follow up on another question on Syria, you mentioned that the SDF was about 20 kilometers from Raqqa. Mm-hmm. Turkey today announced that they're going, after they take al-Bab away from ISIS, they're going to move on Manbij to target the YPG. Is there concern that Turkey's military efforts now might be detracting from the SDF's ability to capture Raqqa?
I think this is something that you've heard Colonel Dorian speak to this recently. We remain very engaged with our Turkish ally. They're a member of the coalition in terms of trying to best coordinate the fight against